What is going on, guys? This is the FanUp Strategy Show. We're going to be talking about the Super Bowl. If you guys aren't aware of what that is not the Pro Bowl, which is happening this weekend. The Super Bowl, which happens the week after. It is the Rams taking on the Bengals, and a game some people, I believe, are anticipating. And we've got some contest talk about over on FanUp. And if you guys are not familiar with FanUp, you could sign up using the link in the description box below. You head on over to FanUp. You can download their app. And if you make an account using the promo code Awesemo, you don't have to put any money down. You just sign up using the promo code Awesemo, get $20 in free play. Don't have to do anything other than that. Don't have to put in any kind of credit card information. Don't have to make a deposit. That's it. Use that promo code. You get $20, free dollars. So Terry, one game, we don't have too much to dive all that deep into, but just kind of some overarching thoughts here. Who's your pick to win the game?
I'm leaning slightly toward the Rams. I think it's going to be a really good game. I think this is probably the most interesting contest we could have gotten out of the four teams that were on the board last weekend. So I'm happy that this is the matchup we get. I think it's going to be a fun, competitive Super Bowl for a change. And I think I'm leaning toward the Rams, but I'm expecting it to be really close. I think these two teams line up pretty well, and they've got similar weapons on both sides. So I expect a really good contest. It could easily go either way, but I'm leaning toward the Rams. That's what I'm rooting for, I think, as well. Little LA, California favoritism there on my part. I really like Cooper Kupp. I like Odell. We've talked about that before, so that's where I'm going with it.
And something else that I'm going to throw in about this game, I'm not sure it's going to be competitive. I have a gut feeling. Remember the first game the Bengals played in the playoffs? Joe Burrow was sacked 9 times. The Bengals do not have a good offensive line. They have a terrific offense. They've got a lot of good weapons there. Burrow is great. His wide receivers are great. Mixon, as far as running backs go, he's probably one of the few that actually does make a difference. Mm-hmm. That game where he was sacked 9 times against the Titans, and I think he's going up against Aaron Donald, going up against Von Miller. A little concerning to me. I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams defensive line just has their way with the Bengals offensive line and just kind of shuts down the offense. That's in my head the way that I think this game is probably most likely to play out, but we'll see. So the Rams are going to be my pick. If I had to, take a side of the game, I would be going with the Rams side there. They're also slight favorites, but I think the line could use to be a little bit bigger. What do you think of that line of logic?
Yeah, it's not a bad thought. I mean, if you're picking somewhere where these two teams do kind of stack up differently, it's that Rams front four. And I mean, when you're bringing in a Von Miller, this is the situation. This is why they want him there. So yeah, it's not a bad thought with the weaker offensive line that those guys and their ability to get to the QB. I can definitely see it. Obviously this is what they're preparing for. This is what they're game planning for. They know that that's coming. So we'll see how they come out. And it's all about how they, initially attack that in the first part of the game, whether they can get out ahead and, maybe negate the pass rush a little bit. We'll see how it comes down. But yeah, if this game is won decisively, that's probably where it would be won decisively. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so let's start talking about the actual Super Bowl here. And if you guys aren't familiar with how FanUp works, Jordan has it right up there up on the screen. Jordan, why don't you click on the Super Bowl 10K Litty contest where legends are made, according to the text there. So the way that FanUp works, it's different than FanDuel, different than DraftKings in a couple of ways. The big one being this: there's no salary cap, so you can play whoever you want, which also means that there's going to be some more concentrated ownership. There's also one other little wrinkle. There's something called the flex position, which is going to be a spot where whichever player you put in the flex, it has to be a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end. They get 1.5x their fantasy points. So we're building a lineup, and keep in mind, this is only for the Super Bowl, doesn't include the Pro Bowl. We're going to be playing a quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end. And let's start by talking about the QB, Terry, because we've got Matthew Stafford, we've got Joe Burrow. And unlike last week, where I think we did have, even though there was more options, Patrick Mahomes was projected way higher than every other QB on the slate. How do you look at the Super Bowl where we only have 2 QBs to choose from between Joe Burrow and Matt Stafford?
Yeah, and looking at our board, we've got them projected so similarly. It's essentially a coin toss, 20.94 using DK projections, 20.23 for Burrow, 29.94 for Stafford. That's essentially the same projection. If we're looking at the yards per pass attempt, 6.6 yards per pass attempt allowed by the Bengals, 6.4 yards per pass attempt allowed by the Rams. So, I mean, we're talking about negligible differences. Both of these teams have elite wide receiver options. They've got really strong passing games. I'm totally fine going with either one of these quarterbacks. I'll spin it back to what you just said, just on the idea that Joe Burrow might be under more of a threat from the pass rush. Let's go with Matt Stafford.
And then, also just given the way that you and I both think the Rams are going to win, the Bengals do appear to be kind of a public team. A lot of people are certainly backing Joe Burrow because he's cool. I think that's something that's kind of resonated with people. Do you think there's going to be a massive ownership gap between the 2 QBs for this contest?
So I don't think I was looking for our ownership earlier, and I don't think we had it up on the site yet for the Super Bowl. I'm sure we're working on that behind the scenes. I would expect that, especially when we've only got the 2 guys to choose from, like, it's not going to get that divergent where it's going to make a massive difference. And it's not going to be really a decision-making factor here. If we do see it in our projections for the other sites where there is, Joe Burrow's coming in 75% for whatever reason, and Matthew Stafford's coming in 25% at like negligible salary differences, then you can extrapolate from that the same thing would probably be true over here. I just don't really expect it, at worst, what's it, 60-40 maybe, and that would be a difference enough to play, but I don't see it even going to that degree.
Yeah. And once again, like I was saying before, it's different. Last week we Patrick Mahomes, this is just off the top of my head. I think we had him projected for something like 26 fantasy points, and the next highest projected QB was at 20 fantasy points. There's just not that big of a gap between Matthew Stafford and Joe Burrow. The other thing to consider too with this game is we could see a situation where the Rams get ahead, the Bengals need to throw to keep up late, and that could be a situation which leads to more passing of the football. Hard to really dive too much more into the quarterbacks because there's 2 of them, and we talked about both of them. There's certainly not an angle where you could play a backup quarterback, number one, that's generally stupid to do on 1 game slates anyway, and that's not even an option that we have here. So we'll go with Matthew Stafford here. Jordan, bring up the running backs, and something else that kind of stands out when you're playing a 1 game slate and you have to choose 2 running backs. Quick math for me, Terry, how many starting running backs are there in this game?
At least 2. I'm sure of that. Is there a 3rd starting running back?
No, it's just 2, which leads me to this here. Is there any reasonable way that you could see yourself getting to a backup running back? I know Cam Akers is a little bit banged up with his shoulder right now. So what? He's going to be good to go for the Super Bowl. You're fooling yourself. That's not. The guy tore his Achilles earlier in the year, and he's back for the playoffs. So I think a little bit of banged up shoulder is going to hold him out, especially when you consider that, he hurt his shoulder last game. What did he miss? 3 plays, comes right back out on the field. So that shoulder injury, it's going to be fine by the time the Super Bowl runs around. Is there any way you could see yourself getting away from Cam Akers or Joe Mixon as the 2 starting running backs in this game?
I would say that the only argument for it really is if you're just looking at it as this is the point at which I'm going to differentiate this lineup from a lot of people and try and make a unique build here. And then maybe, you can stick like a Sony Michel in there. Maybe you go to a P. Ryan and stick him in there. And, it's going to be suboptimal in terms of how it projects, but you're just taking that dart on the touchdown upside of one of these guys, getting a carry near the goal line and getting it over the goal line and into the end zone. So you can try and pick off TDs that way, and it is kind of an interesting point at which to differentiate. We've got multiple wide receiver spots, so there's going to be a lot of different combinations of those wideouts, where I think given the 2 running back spots, 2 starting running backs setup, a lot of people are just going to plug and play the top 2 starting running backs here. So I think there's a little bit of viability for the primary backups for sure.
Yeah. And then I have to ask you this question. If you had, and not saying you have to, but if there's a situation where you absolutely had to play a backup running back for whatever reason, who would you be more apt to go to or most apt to go to in this game?
It would probably be Sony Michel. if you're going to anybody else, you're kind of looking for more like a big play, like, weird thing that breaks. Where Sonny Michel, I can see a narrative where he's getting some just direct calls near the end zone. I can see the idea of Cam Akers gets a few additional plays off, so he's going to be the next logical guy to touch the ball. I think it makes sense from that perspective. So he'd probably be the guy. Just it seems like in my head the most logical guy to go to there and the most likely guy to get the ball in the end zone if we're going to a backup.
Yeah, I guess we can make somewhat of a case for Samaje Perine just because he scored a touchdown last week. Now, with that said, he hardly got touches, but he just happened to bring. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was his first snap of the entire game that he scored a touchdown on. The Bengals were kind of struggling to run the football. They put Perine in. He catches a dump off pass and runs it in, whatever it was, 34 yards for a touchdown, whatever the yardage ended up being. But realistically, we want to go with Joe Mixon and Cam Akers here, right?
Yeah, look, if we're going by the projections, if we're going by the probabilities of who's going to score the most fantasy points, it's easily those guys. If we're not worrying about ownership and we're just plugging in, we're taking advantage of the ability to plug in whoever we want on the FanUp, then absolutely, those are your two guys. It's a no-brainer.
All right, Cam Akers, Joe Mixon, that's the chalk. But with that said, I think it's reasonable enough chalk. We're going to be talking about wide receivers, tight ends. I think those are other positions where we could maybe a little bit more reasonably differentiate away from the popular plays. So let's hit on the wide receivers now. And Cooper Kupp, he's going to project for more fantasy points than everybody else in this game by a very, very wide margin. The only question here, and it's the same question I posed to you last week, are we playing him in the flex spot or are we playing him in the wide receiver spot, Terry?
Well, last week he came out and put up, 11 catches, 142 yards, and 2 TDs, averaging 12.9 a catch, outpacing Odell, got in the end zone both times. We're going to this quarterback. I think it makes a ton of sense to put his super receiver in that spot. Like you said, he's projecting 5 points beyond the quarterbacks on the DraftKings projections. It's just bananas how good this guy is, and he just never slows down. Like, I think I've been kind of just waiting all season for that, like, one game where, all right, Cooper Kupp came out and had 2 catches and 3 fantasy points. And it was just that one clunker game. And it just doesn't come. This guy's so good. Pop him in the multiplier spot. Let's just take advantage, especially if we're just going chalk with this build.
And then I want to ask you, though, just because I do think one of the probably more reasonable ways to differentiate, we'll talk about the superstar spot later. I do think maybe one of the more reasonable ways to find an upside lineup that has a little bit of differentiation is going with like a Jamar Chase or one of the running backs in that flex spot. So that is something else to keep in mind as we go through this. But as for the other wide receivers in this game, clearly the next best wide receiver option behind Cooper Kupp is Jamar Chase. Mm-hmm. But let's operate under the assumption that we're playing Cooper Kupp in that flex spot. We're getting 1.5x fantasy points. We've got Jamar Chase in the other wide receiver spot. Who's your next favorite wide receiver? Because there are a lot of guys from here where we are going to be looking at a little bit of different lineups where not everybody's going to be playing the same guy between, Odell Beckham, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. There's a lot of other wide receivers in the mix we could go with here. Which one's your favorite?
Yeah, so I've mentioned a few times I do really like getting to Odell in a lot of situations. I think he tends to go under-owned, although in a single game slate where we're all picking whoever we want, I'm sure he'll be pretty correctly owned and pretty popular. But I have no issues going to any of the Tyler Boyds of the world, the Van Jeffersons of the world. These are guys who are involved in their passing game. They're highly skilled receivers. They're good weapons to go to. So anybody that's going to be differentiated, and if we had ownership numbers, we could speak to it a little bit better. So keep an eye out for those and just start looking at, the guys who are just purely lower owned. I think it makes a lot of sense to just kind of gravitate toward at least one, if not two of those choices. And whether you're doing it in a situation where, all right, we've already got Cooper Kupp in there, do we go to Odell and just play like a Rams wipeout and try and get as much of that passing game as we want to? Do we do a weird build where we've got Stafford and then Cooper Kupp, and then we focus everything else into the Cincinnati passing game, but without the quarterback? There are differentiated types of approaches that you can take to just the overall lineup construction just by making different choices in here. I think if I was picking a just total favorite, it would probably be Higgins just based on how we've got him projected. But for me, if I'm building, I'm going to Odell, I think, primarily over Higgins in that spot. I do agree that Chase is the second best overall receiver on the board.
And then for the wide receivers here, does which quarterback you choose in your lineup, does it have any impact on what you're doing with wide receivers? I know you and I both agreed that Stafford is our favorite guy, but let's say you're playing multiple lineups in this contest. It's not unreasonable to play some with Stafford, some with Burrow. There's not that much of a projection gap between the two. Is which one you play there going to impact whether you go with like a Beckham or T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd as a secondary wideout option?
I mean, yeah, in that you want to try and correlate some of those potential points. You definitely want to bear in mind that since we've only got one game, there's going to be a limited amount of scoring just overall on the board. So put together different combinations. Like if you're going to a lot of combinations of Kupp and Odell together, then start working with your different combinations of some of these other position players and make sure you're covering a lot of possibilities within that blanket that you've created of Kupp and Odell lineups. I would try and get to a lot of differentiation, though. I think on a site like this, if I'm building multiple lineups, I'm going to try and put together as many unique entries as I can, and not necessarily sweat so much of I have to get two primary receivers with my quarterback. You're going to get that anyway, just based on one game, so many spots to fill. So I'm not really going to worry too much about it. It's going to come together naturally anyway. It is a consideration you always want to stack for football. Trying to stretch this answer a little. That's what I got.
Yeah, fair enough. And then anybody else, if we're going really deep, Jordan, could you scroll down through the wide receivers a little bit? Oh, look at that. We've hit the bottom. I thought maybe there'd be some names way at the bottom were kind of off the board that we could talk about, but it looks like they've only got kind of the core guys included. Beckham Jr., Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of I was going to say that kind of scratches what I was saying about a lot of the different combinations. There's a limited number of combinations that we can build with these guys. So, I mean, we're just going to basically anybody that we want and putting them in, click on whoever you want, put them in the lineup.
All right. Let's head on over to the tight end position now. And this is where things are getting a little dicey because CJ Uzomah hurt. Tyler Higbee also hurt. But we don't know what their status is right now because this game is, let's see, quick math. What are we? Nine days away from the Super Bowl here. Jordan's counting up his fingers really quick. He's going like this, which I don't know. It's like when he counts down for shows. Who knows how many fingers he's holding up? But so for the tight end position, let's look at this a couple of different ways because we've got some time left, and if anybody's questions, you throw those in as well. But let's first assume that all the tight ends are healthy. Let's say we get a fully healthy CJ Uzomah and Tyler Higbee. Under that sort of circumstance, Terry, who's your favorite tight end to go to?
I said it last time around, and I'm going to go back to the same answer. I've been getting to a lot of Higbee throughout the season, and at some point he's going to deliver for me, and maybe it's here he can win me a handbag. So I'll go back to the Tyler Higbee choice. I like him. I like going to that offense. And I think that just on some recency, I think people are going to be more drawn to CJ Uzomah if he goes. I think people will, there'll be a good amount of people who just click on Kendall Blanton regardless of Higbee's status. So I think maybe we can thread a needle for some lower owned ownership on Higbee there.
Yeah. And the other thing too with these guys is I guess Higbee's more likely to play than CJ Uzomah. I'm going to look up really quickly to see if we've got any updates on these guys today. To me, it would seem crazy if Uzomah is able to play because he had it was an MCL. I don't know exactly what the degree of the sprain was, but
yeah, I think it's the same injury for both of them too, right? MCL.
So let's see, CJ Uzomah. All right. Well, Ian Rappaport's repeat. You know, it's part of the issue also when people report on like knee injuries. People don't realize that sprains have way different severities and span a lot of. If you tear your ACL, that's still a sprained knee. So a lot of guys, when they tear their ACL, it's initially diagnosed as a sprained knee. All torn ACLs are knee sprains. Not all knee sprains are torn ACLs. So some people look at it and like, oh, look, it's only a sprained MCL. So people are like, that's good news for some. Maybe but it looks like we don't know the severity of it yet because. Obviously, you know, grade 1 could be week to week, but then you get to a grade 2 MCL injury, and then you're looking at, like 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm no doctor. I know I'm photoshopped in one of our recent thumbnails for a YouTube video, the NBA injury report, which I'm going to be recording after this. But just some overall little bit of information there. I think it would be kind of unlikely if Uzomah plays, but we shall see. But let's talk about some of these backups now, Terry. We've got Kendall Blanton, who played a pretty significant role for the Rams last game after Tyler Higbee got hurt. And then we've got Drew Sample, who exists. I don't really know what else to say about him. He
the
exists.
Bengals.
Yeah, Drew Sample, computer generated player. He's out there though. If there's a situation where Higbee and Uzomah both don't play, which of the backup tight ends would you get to, knowing full well that backup tight ends have, for whatever reason, been extremely prominent in primetime games for DFS contests this year, to the point too where I was like, this is surely going to normalize at some point. And now we're at the Super Bowl and it never did. And we could be looking at two starting backup tight ends. So what a better way to finish the season. Sample versus Blanton. Any takes here?
I think it's got to strongly favor Kendall Blanton just based on what we saw last week. 5 catches, 57 yards, definitely was involved in the offense and looked kind of dynamic out there. He made some things happen when he made those catches. So I think it would be pretty firmly that one. If we're looking at when Sample was in the game, 1 catch for 4 yards, not exactly the same kind of performance, the same kind of dynamic nature. And I think that they're comfy just kind of firing away to the wideouts in Cincinnati, where the tight end going to be a little bit more involved in what the Rams are looking to do. So I think based on that, I would lean toward Blanton. So, cue up the 2 touchdown and 11-yard day for Drew Sample.
And I mean, the other thing too is just because these guys both got hurt so early in last game, we could kind of look at some of the target shares here and draw some conclusions from that about perhaps what the role in the offense could look like. Kendall Blanton last game against the 49ers, 5 catches for 57 yards. He was targeted 5 times. That's somewhat of a substantial role. Drew Sample, meanwhile, I don't have it right off the top of my head, but I'm looking it up right now. I don't remember him really doing anything significant last week after CJ Uzomah got hurt.
Yards, yeah.
It was his final stat line was 1 catch for 4 yards, 2 targets though. And that was also overtime, so he played extra snaps. So just based on that information, Kendall Blanton, that's our guy of the backup tight ends. Are we comfortable with that, Terry?
I think so. I think that's backup tight end. Like you said, this is where we're making our money. So fire up the Kendall Blanton.
All right. It is time to get on with the flex position. And like I said at the top of the show, flex position. The player you play here, it has to be a wide receiver, running back, or a tight end. Whoever you play in there gets 1.5x their fantasy points. So Cooper Kupp's clearly the chalk play here. He's the number one guy to go with. If you want to differentiate, I do think we could go with Joe Mixon or Cam Akers. Here is the downside of that, though. That means we have to play another shitty running back if we do that. So the opportunity cost, is it worth the squeeze, Terry? If we're trying to differentiate and play Mixon or Akers in that 1.5x spot, is it worth us having to play Samaje Perine or Sony Michel in one of the other running back spots?
I mean, it's a differentiated, interesting kind of a build at the very least, right? So we're doing something that not a lot of people will be doing. It's not without upside. It's going to be suboptimal in terms of how it projects out versus a lot of different options on the board for us. But yeah, and I would consider probably going with the direct backup to whoever we put in the multiplier spot. Like give me Akers in the multiplier and Sony Michel in the running back spot versus like a Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, Akers in the multiplier spot. Like if I'm doing that, I think I want to book the upside of just guaranteeing myself the touchdowns and the production from the same backfield from one team.
Here's actually kind of an angle I'm thinking about now, just as we're talking through this. Do you think there's any merit to playing potentially 2 tight ends? Let's say Uzomah and Tyler Higbee are both active. What if we went double tight ends, played either Higbee or Uzomah? I know your lean was towards Higbee. Playing Higbee in the flex spot, because that is not something that really anybody's going to do, but there is kind of a noticeable upside there. We've seen Uzomah and Higbee both individually have big games at times.
Yeah, I don't hate that whatsoever. It's definitely a like you said, it's going to be a very unique construction. Certainly not a lot of people on a site where you can pick basically whoever you want and whatever combinations you want. Not a lot of people going to be going double tight end. Probably not a lot of people going to be putting either one of the tight ends in any situation into that multiplier spot like that, which I guess is the requirement for doing double tight end. But yeah, I have no issue with doing that. It's going to be unique. It's going to be a situation that's probably going to require you to get the tight end right that you're putting in that multiplier. And by get it right, I mean get the touchdown out of them, get a 2 touchdown game out of them. But yeah, I think there's at least some viability in that approach in terms of making a unique lineup, which is what we're really after here.
All right, 1 minute left. Guys, if you haven't done already, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, if you're looking to play on FanUp for the first time, you just sign up using that promo code Awesemo. You don't have to put any money down. You get $20 when you sign up. Here's the final question I'm going to ask you, and we'll sign off with this, Terry. You have to play anybody in the flex spot who isn't Cooper Kupp. Who would be your guy? Can't be Cooper Kupp. Anybody else?
I'm going to go back to the well with Odell Beckham here. I've been saying his name all throughout the show, and just a little old heartstrings. I'm hoping Odell gets a Super Bowl here. DFS-wise, I think Jamar Chase is probably a very good answer there. Our next most highly projected wideout from a team that we expect to be passing quite a bit. So Jamar Chase, probably the better DFS answer. If I'm doing it for me, it's Odell.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Thank you guys very much for whoever stuck around and watched. Haven't done already, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel on the way out. Got a lot more content coming up today. MMA Strategy Show, NBA Deeper Dive, NBA Live Before Lock. Good luck today, guys.